Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We're about to begin the session. And we would like to welcome you here to the Energy Transition Hub. My name is Louise Mabulo, and I will be your moderator. And we are here for the Climate Overshoot Commission's session on reducing the risks of climate overshoot and recommendations of the Commission. So I'm here joined by the incredible commissioners. Of course, to my right, we have Minister Rabbani Khar, we have Commissioner Pascal Lamy, and we have Mark Shimamoto from the AGU. Welcome, and thank you so much for coming to today's session. Our panel will be facilitated Davos style and really have a dynamic conversation that will hopefully be a lot more refreshing considering the gravity and seriousness of today's topic. Now, for a little bit of background, the Climate Overshoot Commission is really this body that is designed to think of the frameworks around future technologies in the event that we see an overshoot past 1.5 as allocated in the Paris Agreement. With this will come the worsening impacts of health, food security, water availability, social stability, and ecosystems. And no country would be safe from any of these consequences. And of course, the least industrialized and developing countries will suffer the most from climate hazards. So the Commission is comprised of world leaders with different backgrounds, industries, and expertise who are coming together with their different insights and inputs from their parts of the world and are working together beyond national interests, beyond perceived biases, to think of the common good in the event of a 1.5 overshoot, which is incredibly salient and an important discussion now that we're here at COP. The Overshoot Commission released a report this September on different topics spanning from SRM, adaptation, spillovers, and even all sorts of topics around geospatial engineering. And we'll hear more about that from our commissioners today, and of course some insights from our resident scientists on the panel. Now, I want to begin this with Commissioner Lamy, and I want to throw the question over to you. Of course, you've been chairing the Climate Overshoot Commission for some years now, and it's a relatively young body, but also thinking of many future scenarios of climate overshoot. Could you please share with us the rationale of the Climate Overshoot Commission, maybe some background and context setting of why it was established, and what are its main recommendations? What will we find in the report?
Thanks, Louise. Let me first thank you for moderating this discussion. Louise is one of the members of what we call our Youth Engagement Group, which is a group of young people coming from 5 continents, in which we decided from the very beginning we would involve in the discussions and deliberations of the Climate Overshoot Commission. So these young people were not members of the Commission. They did not have to sign the report, agree on the recommendations, but at various times in the work of the Commission, they were called in to interact with the members, either in meetings or in writing. I must confess that this experience was sometimes a bit bumpy, but at the end of the day, I think they succeeded in, let's say, augmenting the scope of our discussions and the recommendations of the Commission. So let me thank you for that. Now, a few words on why this Climate Overshoot Commission, which was a decision, the decision to have it was taken at the Paris Peace Forum, which I was chairing at the time. I'm now back to Vice President because we have a total North-South parity and the chair has to rotate every 5 years. We thought that given the very high risk of overshooting this 1.5 threshold, and we just know here in Dubai that we had a scientific report yesterday that said this is already done, it will happen. The view we take is that there is a high likelihood it happens, and which is why we have, and this is the mandate of the Climate Overshoot Commission, we have to take a fresh look at what needs to be done to reduce or limit the risks of overshoot. And in order to do that, we have to relook at all the available options. Our starting point is that the conversation on global warming and climate change has so far been very much siloed: cutting emissions, adaptation, carbon removal, somehow geoengineering, has been most of the time a discussion with an overweight from the north, and a discussion which was very seldom done by people who are free, independent. This led to the composition of the Commission with a majority of people from the south. I made sure that we would have 7 people from the south and 5 from the north. That led to a composition of the Commission with members coming from the 5 continents and from various experiences in government, international organization, climate activism, and expertise. Plus, of course, this youth group, which I already mentioned. And all these people have been members of this commission, are still members of this commission, in their own capacity. So we don't report to anybody. The only mandate we have is the one from the Paris Peace Forum. We have no specific legitimacy, and this is a weakness on one side. We're not mandated by a political body that asks us to do that, but on the other side, we did it in full independence, and I can tell you a few of the discussions among the members of the Commission did show that they were extremely independent. Finally, to answer the last part of your question, Louise, what we've done is, as per the mandate, look at a fresh look at cutting emissions, adaptation, carbon removal, and geoengineering. We led overall to what we call the SCARE agenda: cut, adapt, remove, explore, C before A, before R, before E. And if you read the report, which of course we would love you to do, you will see that the sort of 10, 12, 15 major recommendations could be conditional, could be an agenda for a serious climate negotiation. That would factor in every dimension of the problem and every possible solution to the problem. That's the purpose of the Commission. It's looking at this across the board, and for the first time, a commission of independent people coming from 5 continents has been looking at the issues and the solutions across the board, and we make recommendations which we know are ruffling seriously feathers here and there, such as stopping fossil fuel in the north while letting the south, at least the poorest part of the south. We don't really use north-south or rich-poor. We use industrialized and non-industrialized countries because this is what matters in terms of carbon emissions. So we propose stopping on the north while leaving a time for adjustment to the south. We propose, for instance, to consider carbon take-back obligations. And on the most controversial part of the solutions, which is geoengineering, and notably the version of geoengineering which has been the most researched so far, which is solar radiation modification. What we propose is invest in research more. So in our view, it's a box that needs to be opened while proposing a moratorium on experiments that would entail a risk of unintended consequences until these unintended consequences have been properly investigated by serious research. But the consensus in the Commission that this is an option which should be considered research-wise until the moment where we lead, if we were to go there, and nobody knows, to experiments which would risk to have what we call transboundary consequences, which is a very clearly identified international law concept. So that's roughly why we did it, where we are, and over to you, Louise.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Lamy. And indeed, we are in unprecedented times, and that warrants unprecedented conversations. And that's why we also need a body like the Climate Overshoot Commission to create reports and have these sorts of recommendations, because if not now, then when will we begin thinking of these instances of what we have to do in terms of an overshoot? Now, to Commissioner Khar, you've dedicated almost a lifetime of work into climate action and climate solutions. What sets, in your opinion, what sets this Climate Overshoot Commission and its reports apart from all the many others that we're seeing today?
Okay, thank you. And, when you point out that I've dedicated a lot of time to climate, effects of climate change, I just want to mention that I have never been, and by way of that try and make a point, I have never been directly managing the climate change scenarios or been in government jobs or parliamentary bodies which have looked at it. But by way of being associated with Ministry of Economic Affairs, Finance, and Foreign Affairs, climate change for countries like Pakistan becomes a mainstream issue, because the wrath of climate is not equally distributed. Even though that no industrialized country will be able to, keep itself away with all the money in the world from the wrath of climate change and its impact, but some countries are disproportionately affected by not their own actions, but historical actions of industrialized countries and others. So I'm going to, as far as how is this different, there are 2 or 3 ways, and important ways in which this commission is different. And I'm going to start by what Pascal said, because I think that's very important. Once this report was out, and especially the summary, I was thinking that if I were today to be in a policy-making space of an important industrialized or developing country, I would really want to read this report or the summary. Because the question is not only looking at, novel ways of dealing with climate change, but it's actually looking at what already exists in the toolkit, which we have not deployed sufficiently and at the right time. So mitigation, only mitigation, 10 years back, 20 years back, 20 years back perhaps, could have been the solution. We won't have to look at novel, unintended consequences type of areas to look at what. So currently, I think what this report does is it says, first of all, recognize the moment that we're in. In recognizing the moment that we're in, we need to recognize the fact that if we continue to go on the same trajectory that we're going right now, we are certainly going to be in the overshoot moment. And once we're in the overshoot moment, then the options are not all that safe. They're not all that known. You'll have to deploy tools which are perhaps far more, let's say dangerous or unknown, but you will not have an option but to do them. Now, do you want to go into that world being completely unprepared, as we were in some ways for AI, for artificial intelligence? We had not done any negotiation. We had not really prepared for it. And here we are, and now we're talking about what will it do? How are we ready for it? Or do we want to be kind of ready for it and recognize the problems, recognize the risks, and say, but do we need to put money and negotiation into the research that for products that may be a necessary requirement? They may not be a luxury, they may be a requirement. And then also, I think what is really unique about this commission was that even though we are very, very, and Pascal did a very good job, and a chair like him is what attracted many of us to come in the first place. So he did a very good job of making sure that we had a lot of the correct geographical representation. In fact, what is generally called the Global South was overrepresented rather than underrepresented. But each one of us were guided by science advisors, also who we sat with hours at end, days at end, to be able to educate ourselves and to be able to educate each other with our views. But I think each one of us came with an open mind. we were not inhibited by positions that traditionally countries and regions, including the G77, the developed world, the developing world, the industrialized world had taken. And that is a bit of a free sort of freedom to be able to apply reality, logic, reason, science, and make your decisions. And therefore, when it comes to adaptation, when it comes to mitigation, for instance, this commission recommends that for mitigation, the industrialized countries should reach net zero before the developing countries, okay? Because for adaptation, we recognize that the financing gap has been a major contributor to the distrust that exists between the developing world and the developed world. So going forward, if we do not address what we already know to be the problem areas, guess what? We're going to continue to do no action, right? So I think what this report really does is really codify that what are those areas which require immediate action. That also has to do with mechanisms for accountability, mechanisms for when it comes to adaptation. How do we account for it? How do we know? What is the matrix to be able to? So I think all in all, on the CARE, which is cut emissions, adapt, reduce, and explore SRM, with a complete moratorium on immediate deployment. And why the complete moratorium on immediate deployment? Because it is what scares people of going into a world where we do not know the consequences, and therefore the Commission is, respectful of that reality. So yeah, so I think it's work which is based on experience of a lot of people who have had important jobs in their own careers, but are now looking at this from the vantage point of solvers of problem rather than holders of position.
That's a really salient point. If you think about it, the report is articulating these issues and creating a meaningful pathway through preventative measures and utilizing tools that we already have and the strengths on how we can mobilize and accelerate things like funding, and really think about, as you mentioned, that CARE framework, which I will ask Commissioner Lamy about a little bit later on. But first, I want to go over to Mr. Shimamoto. And of course, the Commission recommends reviewing the global governance of climate change. And for you, as the Global Outreach Director of the AGU, it's a global association of Earth and space scientists. Can you discuss how the scientific community is contributing to climate change action informing governance?
Yes, gladly. And thank you, Louise, for that question, as well as thank you, commissioners and the team here for allowing us to be part of the panel. As you said, I'm Mark Shimamoto. I'm Director of Global Outreach Programs at AGU. And AGU is a community of Earth and space scientists, about 500,000 in size in 148 countries, really understanding the science of our Earth system, our climate system, other dynamics, etc. We're most well known for our 24 peer-reviewed scholarly journals. We convene very large and small scientific meetings. We maintain and advocate for science and scientific ethics. And we provide the needed career support and training for the Earth and space science community at large. When it comes to kind of climate action and thinking under the guise of how science helps to inform action or governance, etc., there's many different ways. I think kind of when you look holistically at our Earth system, the information that is published in our journals as well as discussed at our meetings, and then of course improved and developed and spearheaded through our membership, there are a lot of different ways that they contribute. The science is often assessed in major assessment reports like the IPCC. That data is also sometimes used or leveraged for some of the decision support tools and information that was just discussed on this panel to help inform decision making and governance. But it's also important that those resources and the scientific community itself look to see not only how is that information usable, but also used. And so some core ways that science helps to inform action is making sure that as much as possible, the research, the data, the information is open, it's accessible, it's leverageable into ways that communities can use it, other scientific disciplines can learn from it and work with. And that's a major way that we can help that knowledge exchange while also providing the fundamental research and science to support decisions. Second is this concept of how you kind of, again, advance the usability piece. So science is traditionally done in field testing, labs, etc. But more and more, our scientific community is actually partnering with local communities. Communities come to the scientific enterprise, if you will, and have specific questions about the risks, the vulnerabilities that they're facing in their community. And those scientists work with them. They volunteer their time to help to understand and work together based on those questions to co-define a solution. And I think when we're especially talking about adaptation, we're especially talking about risks and vulnerabilities that have large implications for local communities. That is such a great and important way that not only strengthens the science, but ensures that the science is pointing to the responsible solution and ensuring that it can inform either local policy, but also just, in your backyard solutions. And then lastly, I kind of wanted, going back to some of the other findings of the Commission report, is AGU has a strong commitment to scientific ethics. And as technology evolves, as the science evolves, as there's different complex challenges in where the science is leading, not only just overshooting, but how to keep below 1.5 or 2 degrees, whether it's mitigation, adaptation, or climate interventions, we feel that there's a strong need to uphold scientific ethical practices, not just to uphold scientific ethical practices within science, but also making sure that the ethical practices that guide science are informed by communities, and liaise with community consultation, and actively think about the greater risks, impacts in those stakeholder groups that have a very important voice in the conversation. So if wide-scale CDR tends to expand, or if SRM expands, that the root of the science is done in an ethical way. So maybe I'll stop there with just a few ways that we see science informing governance as well as climate action.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shimamoto. And I think that's really important to have that data translation point and making it accessible and usable, because it's one thing to see the charts and the data, and it's one thing to have it published. It's another thing to understand it and know how to utilize it in a way that's meaningful, especially for countries like mine in the Philippines and the global south. Sometimes it's difficult to access these kinds of pieces and bits of information. But if we are able to do it and we're able to translate it over to the ground and what we already see, I think that's a really vital point that we require. So we heard the science, and we've heard about kind of the whole idea behind the report. Now I want to kind of bring it all the way back out, and I think Minister Khar had mentioned this earlier about the CARE framework. So I want to go over back to Commissioner Lamy and ask, what is the sequencing of the CARE agenda that you suggest? We have C for cut emissions, A for adapt, R for remove carbon dioxide, and E for explore SRM. And my second part of this question is, should the international community act on all of these suggestions at once? Because you have the scientific side, and now it's more on the governance end of it.
Well, I think the dream of the Commission, after months and months of deliberation, of learning, and we had a very solid scientific advisory group with us, the dream of the Commission would be that all these recommendations would be taken together in either a global or a national conversation. And we believe that if that was done, then this would definitely lead to very seriously ramping up the needed action in order to limit the risk of the 1.5. I think most of us in this room would share the view that we are way from being where we should be if we want to limit the risk of overshooting 1.5. Second, that given this reality, we have to change, accelerate, put much more political energy in the various options, ways, policies, instruments to get there. And again, doing it together, which would inevitably lead to trade off conversations, not least when resources are needed, and we know we need a lot of resources that would not normally be mobilized by the various tools and sectors of market capitalism. We believe that this is the way to really take stock of where we are, look at the options, and discuss the necessary trade-offs. And the necessary trade-offs are probably not the same at national level for Sweden or for Pakistan or for Kenya or Paraguay. I'm convinced about this, but this should take place, in our view, within a global conversation. That would provide the necessary trade-offs. I will do this if you do that. I will do that if you do this. This is the only way of moving forward. We believe that if, according to the Paris Agreement, which definitely was a big step forward, but if, according to the Paris Agreement, everybody goes to net zero at some time, the sum not being the same, with some speed, the speed not being the same, with some instrument, the instruments not being the same, we are in reality slowing instead of accelerating what we need to do, hence the necessity of this global conversation. I know that the SRM part of the report is controversial. When I look at the map of the reactions we had in the month following the publication of the report, mid-September, on this issue, we roughly have 1/3 of reactions. These people opened the door too much for solar radiation modification. 1/3 saying these people did not open the door enough for solar radiation modification, which leads me to believe that the third believes we probably got it right in devising the user's notice of research and in proposing this moratorium, which I will repeat, is a voluntary moratorium. So our recommendation is not that we should convene a large diplomatic exercise, which would take 25 years, discussing the criteria for entering or exiting this moratorium. Our recommendation is that countries should voluntarily decide to adopt this moratorium according to terms which they would decide, and then this will start the ball rolling so that we eliminate one of the risks of this option, which is a unilateral action by a country which might have negative consequences on other countries. So that's roughly where we are. But to go back to the initial part of your question, Louise, we believe we need a much larger, holistic conversation, discussion, and negotiation to review all these options.
No, I find that very interesting, Commissioner, because you think about all of these aspects. You talk about kind of an alignment of the care agenda with the scientific community and all these different industries working in parallel to each other. And I think that's an interesting point that I would love to bring up to you, Mr. Shimamoto. So you say that AGU is facilitating the development of an ethical framework for climate intervention. And as Commissioner Pascal said, we're having these controversial conversations around climate and the developments around it. So for research, experimentation, and possible deployment, you're looking into all of these aspects. So in a way, is this parallel to the need for governance? And can you explain more about the initiatives and how the ethics intersect specifically with the governance?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think it just really follows along to your points, Commissioner Pascal. I think these are tricky issues. These are difficult conversations. There is a lot at stake when the importance of the matter should be really focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the first place and, of course, preparing for the adaptation needs. However, within the scientific community, there are ongoing conversations of what other tools in the toolbox need to be better assessed as laid out in the Commission report. And then the additional question, how to do that responsibly, how to do that ethically. And so building on this notion and this need for a dialogue, a community-informed framework of principles that could not only benefit perhaps the research community, but companies who are starting up in this space, or governments who are starting to do incentive funding or grants in this space, and then again, this intergovernmental space, having conversations of what does this mean for kind of more global conversations in the policies. So last year, AGU begun a process to develop an ethical framework. And this framework is really intended not necessarily to justify or inform or say that research and action needs to happen in this space, but rather be a framework for decision making. And that could be that we do not progress in this space, or we don't know enough yet and we need to kind of pause in this space. Or for some areas of climate intervention, maybe the science is strong enough that we can continue to grow and expand. And so what this process is really looking to do is build off ethical practices in medicine, in genomics, in other parts of geoscience that we've learned too, how to guide strong ethical principles in research, and build off past reports. There's been reports on this for the past 15 years, from the Oxford Principles to the Asilomar Conference recommendations to most recently, I just think of a week ago, UNESCO's Ethics Commission released a report on this very subject. And so how can we build on these important topics and allow space, room to discuss not only the state of the knowledge in science, but what are the key ethical questions? How can you follow and better understand current state, local, regional, global policies in this space and understand the regulatory system that already exists? Two, how can you ensure that any data created in this space or projects are transparent, accessible, and your results are shared, as well as you're monitoring your methods and efficacy in an open way? In addition, community participatory action, working with the communities you may be experimenting in and better understanding what their concerns are, not just under the lens of kind of local policy, but those who maybe have marginalized, those who have had impacts in that community, those who undertake an assessment of environmental, procedural, corrective justice that's critical to guide an ethical conversation for science. And so that's what we're hoping to develop. It's underway right now. We had a 3-month public comment period where we received over 100 pages of comments from every part of the world, from scientists to ethicists, but also community leaders, because we see this not a product of AGU or a product for science, but really a product for society. So, great question.
If I may come in there, you just mentioned this UNESCO piece which was published last week, coincidentally, just before the COP28. Which is about the ethics of climate engineering. And I understand you're also working on that, and that's understandable because there is a very strong ethical dimension there. What's your reading of this UNESCO piece? You find it okay? You find it balanced? You find it tilted? According to your own experience, what's your reaction to this piece?
I can give my personal views on the report and not speaking on behalf of AGU, but I think the critical findings of that report is it did do a holistic deep dive of the ethical implications of different technologies, where the state of the knowledge is, what should be considered, and in many ways, this parallels the efforts that we're trying to do to provide kind of guidelines and principles. We're not governing those principles. We will let others make those decisions on how they choose to implement. But but I think a strong dialogue and discourse of the ethics of the science, as well as practical proposed principles, are key to ensuring strong governance and protective of our communities.
Well, on the point of the ethics of the science, when we think about the pathway to a below 1.5 degree future, we think that there are certain aspects that are universal that we can all mutually agree on, and that is emissions reduction and adaptation. Now, to Commissioner Khar, do you think the Commission puts a sufficient emphasis on emissions reduction and adaptation, and how can its advocacy advance these two priorities in the global debate that we're currently having, especially here given COP28?
Okay, so I don't want to sound like a salesperson, okay, but of the report, but I am someone who put in a lot of, I think we all have a lot of opportunity cost of our time. And I think one thing we can say about all of the commissioners is that we put in a lot of time in trying to agree, to disagree on some and agree to agree on one. But at the end, what emerged is a product which tells you on the state of play and what are the missing links or the foolish things that as international community and the world, we have not been able to agree, which is absolutely indefensible, right? And on mitigation, I think, again, far too much time has been spent on, no, it is your responsibility before mine and what will happen to us. If you were to look at it all from the framework of fairness, everything will become far less complicated. And therefore, the Commission does do that, because on mitigation, the Commission, for instance, recommends that the industrialized countries should reach their net zero commitments far ahead of the developing world. Because please do not forget, for the developing world, you are talking at a very, very large or high cost. There's a high opportunity cost of spending money on mitigation, not having deployed all of their coal resources, for instance, etc., and now not allowed to deploy those coal resources and then spend money on shifting of their existing energy sources to the other one. That is costly. Now, are you expecting them to take the money away from feeding the poor, from building health facilities, basic health facilities, or would you rather put more burden on the industrialized countries of the same? So that's one. On adaptation, I think a very similar thing is happening. Now, if you look at the reality on adaptation, adaptation, as the Commission report clearly articulates, is hyper-local, right? So you cannot have a one-fit-all type of a scenario or a solution, one solution fits all type. So you have to allow every country to develop its adaptation program, but then there is a large-scale financing required for that. Where is that financing going to come from? We know that the financing commitments on adaptation financing has been overwhelmingly low. Okay, I was surprised only yesterday to find out that the adaptation fund currently has 17 million euros or dollars, which has been committed by Switzerland, and that's about it. We all know that the adaptation requirements are about $300 billion. We also know that there's a commitment of about $100 billion a year or so, which has already been made. Where is the accountability of that? And as someone who has managed the aid portfolio for an aid recipient country, I can tell you there's a lot of juggling going on right now. Development fund being rerouted and put into the adaptation fund. Now, if the intention is to continue to play games of showing our commitments, we can continue to play these games for the next 2 centuries also, right? Well, the planet that is inhabiting all of us may no longer be able to house us in those conditions. I think so really what it does is it looks at the reality on the ground and says that we should stop hiding behind buts and ifs and start doing what each of us can do. I am just going to also share with you one example to me as a negotiator on behalf of the government of Pakistan at various forums, various parts of my life. I think one thing that has always amazed me is that how we have allowed this world to become where we are able to categorize our policies as something and not have to do that at all. Okay, I'll give you the example of many countries, many developed countries calling their foreign policies feminist foreign policies. Well, guess what? When it comes to climate change or any of the positions that the countries have changed, the fact that it disproportionately affects women has absolutely no impact on their foreign policies. So how am I, just because you're stating your policy to be compliant with one and feminist, etc. It doesn't become that. You have to do it. Just hearing it is not enough. So I think really another thing that I'm quite proud of is that we have looked at the existing pitfalls and the lack of action from the viewpoint of fairness also, and said that what is logical and reasonable and has not been done because we have stood behind our strongly stone-carved positions will not hold anymore, and must not and should not hold in order to go forward. So yes, the mitigation and adaptation part is very much part of the framework. And therefore, it's not only, as I said in the very beginning, I think this is very important. We're not only talking about new technology. We're talking about existing commitments which have already been made and what has come in the way of us meeting them as the global community, because this is everyone's problem. This is not a developing world or a developed world problem. We've seen floods in Hong Kong and in New York, recently somewhere in Spain. I mean, it's all over the place. No one can protect themselves by their status of being industrialized or having that many billions of dollars in their foreign exchange reserves. Okay, this is everyone's problem, and I think the moment has come that we must recognize it.
So we need better accountability. We're having all these dialogues. We're having these negotiations in the halls happening. I remember we had the Global Financial Pact recently, and there was debt relief pauses. And of course, that's all these amazing commitments are coming out, $100 billion per year, the loss and damage fund, the global goal and adaptation. So it's more on the action that happens after, and the accountability is that what you're saying, Commissioner?
Yes, because you see, to make claims and not go, because I'll give you a very good example, the adaptation financing. I mean, forget individual support. Look, adaptation financing is a very serious matter. Again, as someone who's held positions in the finance ministries of a developing world, of a developing country, I can tell you the resources are very, very constrained. And are you going to expect developing countries to choose from educating, primary education I'm talking about, educating and feeding the poor and using all of the financing for adaptation, or are you going to come and keep your commitments which have already been made in the international forums? So it's about just getting real and really not keeping your commitments because you are a good person, but keeping your commitments because it's the right thing to do for your country and for your people also. So we have to stop. This negotiation is a very costly negotiation. Taking positions has been very, very costly. I think far more costly than anywhere else. So the climate diplomacy has to change, okay? And that's what I'm talking about.
And that's also a conversation of shifting power. Mr. Shimamoto, I would love to hear your perspective on these negotiations from a scientific perspective. We've seen the science, and it almost sounds like a broken record. The latest UNEP report was actually titled Broken Record, because we're saying the same things year after year, and we know we have the facts, and we just need to do something about it. We have all of the pieces of the puzzle, or the chess pieces in front of us, and we just need to start mobilizing. So I'd love to hear your perspective from someone in the scientific community who's seeing these develop over the years.
Great question. And I'm gonna maybe answer that in a few different ways. I think asking science for more science will always say yes. I think that we'll never know every question, every impact, every vulnerability. So there's always room to do more, to better understand the knowledge, to better provide more detailed information. That being said, the scientific consensus of what needs to happen in a changing climate to both mitigate and adapt are key. We know that information, it is clear. We need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and keep our planet under 1.5 degrees Celsius. That being said, there are other ways science and scientists, like I kind of alluded to in the beginning, are trying to take novel approaches, not just to influence the deliberations here at COP, but ensure that to that point earlier, science is not just usable, but used. And I think the more you engage policymakers, the more you have science represented here, science represented in the commission report, and I know you had a scientific advisory board working on that. The more you can bring the science local, I think also helps, right? These communities, for the most part, know what's happening. They know the challenges. They know the state of the science. How can we help to guide scientific conversations and solutions that really matter and prioritize to the local level? I think it's also key. Sharing those stories, communicating those broadly, showing that effective measures at all scales can be protective and taking action on climate. Just earlier this June, AGU and some different partners convened a science conversation around climate and health for Africa, specifically looking at the availability of how we can better improve early warning systems and different predictive capacities that not only help to warn about what we know about the challenges of a changing climate to health, so not just heat waves, but also looking at infectious disease outbreaks and looking at other layers. And then how does that translate into health practice? There are a lot of different health systems that have their own approaches and ways that they respond to the health crises that we continue to see, and of course we'll see in a worsening space. How can we connect those two to make sure that those solutions are implementable and the health practitioners are there at the table when the scientists are working on that? All of this to say that this generation of knowledge, this generation of collaboration can help influence this. And I will say, for example, COP28, it's the very first time health was on the agenda for its very first time. So it's quite great to see that there are efforts changing, but yes, policy does need to change and we need to act quickly.
And in the efforts around COP, I'm curious, and I'm veering much off script. I know I've not briefed anyone with these questions beforehand, but I'd love to hear each of your kind of inputs and your expectations for the outcomes of this COP, if there's any hopes or really interesting contention points that you think we might be able to work through in the remaining days of COP28 and its negotiations and deliberations. If anyone would be comfortable to take it away.
Yeah, and then I think we should take some questions or observation from the audience. I think as compared to other bodies of international governance, and I have been navigating among quite a lot of them for the last 30 years, COPs bring a very useful element, which is the bottom-up element. The one that comes from mobilizing energies from other than the people who are negotiating the communique. The ones that are negotiating the communique are top. This is top-down. It matters. That's, I think, not the most brilliant or efficient part of the system, not least because the results are that we, for the moment, are not there, but it is a necessary component. This world is divided into 200 sovereign nations, and the sovereign nations have to discuss a long time to coalesce along a few common lines. Takes time, interests are different, values are different, it matters. I think what matters more in COPs is what we've been trying to do with the Paris Peace Forum since the beginning, which is mobilize energy to solve the big problems we have, coming from business, NGOs, cities, large academic institutions, in other words, non-sovereign stakeholders in international cooperation. And I believe that this is very important. Let me just take an example on which I've been working in recent days, which is this agreement by a few large global shipping companies that, although they compete like mad for cargo, they will strive together to decarbonize shipping, which we know is a major issue in global trade. This is something that helps. And if steel producers or fertilizer producers would agree to do the same, and I mean, the shipping example is a very specific one, because if you take 5 or 6 of these large companies, you probably get more than 50% of the value of shipping. Okay. But I mean, this is my answer to your question. I know that things like this are brewing. I'm impatient to see how many of them will flourish during these 2 weeks. I'm not very optimistic on the first top-down part, by experience, and I've been part of that, which is one of the reasons why I shifted on the other side, which is the bottom-up side.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'm going to say on this one is that, a really big problem, if you were to identify the many problems we have, they're on many different arenas, but one really big problem is that of distrust between the developing world and the developed world on the whole question of climate change. And that one big problem comes in the way of every negotiation, whether it's from the care architecture or, if you were to break down mitigation, adaptation, using other, the lack of trust comes in the way of everything, right? So what I would like to see from this COP, and I was very happy that on the first day, at least the announcement of the creation of the fund, which is still largely quite underfunded, of the loss and damage fund, which took us 27 years to even negotiate to get on the, on the papers as an agenda. And unfortunately, I have to say, it took something like the floods of 2022 in Pakistan, which affected 33 million people, had 100 kilometers lake, affecting people for months and months to really trigger perhaps that in the previous COP. So for an event like that to actually trigger us into action after 27 years or so, now that it has been made, I would hope that the Loss and Damage Fund is appropriately funded. And not only that, that all the commitments which are a byproduct or a product of hard, strong, long negotiations over days and nights and weeks and months and years over the last many, many decades. But once the commitments are made, whether it's on adaptation financing or in giving a helping hand on mitigation to the developing countries, that we are able to rebuild that trust. Once the trust is built, I can assure you the negotiations for the future of climate change issues is going to be far easier. So I think a really big elephant in the room is the lack of trust on the whole climate question, and I think we cannot leave it unaddressed.
Yeah, and I see a little bit of both. There's this culture and this almost community bottom up approach of where people are gathering. It's not just scientists talking to scientists or policymakers talking to policymakers, health workers talking to health workers, but there's this intentionality to come together on some of the topics that are cross-cutting, that the deliberations are focusing on, where this venue provides that opportunity for that dialogue to bring kind of the best available knowledge from all different parts of the world and all different sectors, to think about the conversations, to have conversations about overshooting and the governance implications. And that is one thing that inspires kind of the conversation of COP. There's also the deliberations and the decision-making processes, and a few competing decision conversations and what to fund and how to fund. And those are tricky conversations to have, but I think by having all of us together, by applying pressure lightly or through advocacy to better understand how we can advance some of those agenda items as a collective group through the different constituency groups, whether it's research, youth, environmental advocacy, there's purpose. I have hope.
For me, it's like the concept of taking down these echo chambers and working intersectionally, breaking down silos and shifting power over, or even transitioning power if you think it through a little bit more. But now, on the point of shifting power, I want to turn to the audience and see if anyone has any burning questions that you would like to ask. Oh yes, there's a gentleman in the front. If you could say your name, where you come from, and of course your institution, I'll come to you.
My name is Job Maats. I have a question for the Overshoot Commission. How is the relationship between you and the official parties? How effective are you in getting your points across? And is there clear feedback from the official sector to the Overshoot Commission? And is that dialogue anywhere reported?
As I said in the beginning, we are an independent body. We were not asked by a legitimate political constituency to do what we did. We did it freely. We published our report on the 15th of September in New York. Since then, we've been reaching out to various audiences, like we do it today. Some are governments, some are international organizations. I had an interesting meeting with the UN SG, for instance, with UNDP, with UNEP, with the World Meteorological Organization. So this part of the system is already in reaction with us. They are asking questions, they are expressing, not publicly, but we have a dialogue. As far as governments are concerned, we've had a few bilateral conversations or discussions. I had one with John Kerry a few days ago, and he had been quite interested in the work of the Commission while the Commission was working. And let me not disclose the terms of this conversation. We've now been approached by a few governments on the ground of this SRM moratorium. And the question is, we may be looking at this option. We believe we should engage in research. We believe the user's notice for research, you recommend, we like it. Research has to be more north-south. It has to be transparent. The funding of research has to be transparent in order to alleviate any suspicion that, geoengineering is a pretext for not doing other things, which is why we repeat and repeat that C comes before A, comes before R, comes before E. So we are now engaged in this sort of bilateral discussions. Of course, I have to be responsible for the budget of what we do, and we have benefited from philanthropic funding. We still have funding for 2024, so we will keep reaching out, if necessary, publishing briefs or more precise recommendations on those among, let's say, the 12 or 20 that have surfaced. So that's where we are for the moment. But it's too soon to say what I would love to say. It's too soon to say what I would love to say, which is that we've already impacted reality. That's our collective wish. This is why we spend a bit of time and money doing that. So too far to say that, but there are signs of interest.
Incredible. Yes, so the gentleman in blue. Lady with the microphone will come to you. And please state your name, your organization, and then your question.
Yeah, hello, thank you for the discussion. Ashley Bateson, UK Green Building Council. The point about developing countries achieving net zero before developed countries reaching net zero before developing, and the concept of climate justice has been discussed, but living in a country like the UK that feels like it's rich enough, interestingly, when the Prime Minister slows down net zero policies, it seems popular with a large part of the population. So there's always a challenge for rich countries to be tempted to have a populist approach to not accelerate decarbonisation. What can stakeholders do to reinforce the need for richer people to accept climate justice, because it's not in the media in regular conversation?
Yeah, I think let's call a spade a spade. I think that'll be really trying to stretch the outreach of the Commission to think that you can have an impact on the populism which is currently sort of inundating all of us all over the world, right? And populist decisions are sometimes very costly decisions. And sometimes the populist decisions are not one which are the best for the country. So we find it rather amazing, at least I can speak for myself, that countries such as even Norway, which are very good with putting, by good I mean a little bit sarcastically, by putting exceptional conditionalities on the giving of aid to Africa and Asia, etc., on how they should act, what they should do related to climate change, related to women empowerment, etc., would continue to drill because they have the resources to do so, right? And countries like the UK, which have traditionally been forerunners in doing the right thing, not since a few years maybe, but that could be a personal opinion, decide to also go back on commitments which have been made rather than go forward on overcommitting or reaching those commitments before time. So we are, I think this is the whole rage of populism has been a very costly enterprise. So thinking what the Commission can do to try and encourage, I don't think we have the means to do it. I think what the Commission has done is to sift out the positioning which is not based on logic and reason, and it's just positioning because it's historical positioning, and say this doesn't make sense, okay, and this makes sense on each of the really important issues. So as I repeatedly keep on saying this at the cost of repetition, not only on what new scientific ways we need to do, what type of research we need to do, but on stuff which has already been in the mainstream, stuff which has already been committed to, on mitigation, what is holding us back? How can we make sure that everybody goes forward? On adaptation, for instance, there are one or two things which are really important because you do need a common matrix. The Commission, in its report, forwards the making of the common matrix on adaptation. And so there are all of these areas where the movement has not been as good or as fast as it should have been. And I think by mentioning those and breaking the problem down, I think we have, what I can say is, done our part. On adaptation, for instance, early warnings for all has been a long known requirement. The Commission again reputs that. Then agriculture and agri-food systems. Okay, so we can continue to show our commitment to adaptation financing, but without recognizing that these are areas which really affect the developing world. So it's really just understanding, accepting reality as it exists, addressing it to be able to address the trust deficit, and moving on climate negotiation.
Let me just add one or 2 points. First, I totally agree that climate justice is first and foremost a North-South problem. And I'm personally convinced that if we don't fix it, we're on for a very dangerous North-South polarization on global warming, which, given the myriad of other polarization this planet is having, is a very large risk. My point is that there is also a North-North climate justice problem. I'm a European. Most of non-Europeans are convinced that Europe has become a green continent and that the whole of the population is in favor of a carbon price at 120 euros a ton, and that greening is moving fast. What is true is that we may be moving faster than elsewhere, but there is a large part of EU public opinion who says, why should we do that if other countries like us, they just leave aside poorer countries or less industrialized countries, why should we do that if others don't do it? And I think on this, there is a North-North conversation which has to take place and which sometimes is taking place. And the reality, as I see it, is that since the EU embarked on the CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment measure, the conversation with EU-like developed countries has been very, very seriously enhanced. So it also may depend on policies and instruments, not just discoursing and political pressure.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Commissioner. Have one more question from the lady in the back? Yes.
First of all, I'd like to thank the panelists. My name is Anusha. I work as a climate tech manager here in Dubai. Can you hear me?
Maybe, maybe if you could speak a bit louder into the microphone.
Oh, okay. Can you?
There we are.
Okay. My question is for former Minister Khar. You spoke extensively about how there is a mistrust between the global south and the global north, and that's causing some disruption within the progression of these negotiations. My question was, how do you think that mistrust can be overcome, and whether that's been successful so far in terms of addressing the mistrust?
Okay, so with whatever experience I have in diplomacy, I can tell you this much. When you want to achieve 100% in a very short time frame, you typically land at 0. Okay, and when you want to do an incremental approach and have the patience to be able to build the trust, you're able to go take it step by step, right? So I would consider, so I'm not going to be a permanent pessimist. I, in fact, believe myself to be a permanent optimist. But, the times are not very optimistically inclined, let's just put it that way. But that the loss and damage fund itself, I think, is a step towards building of trust, right? Now, how that is funded, how it is utilized, whether it's just funded and is not utilized, etc., will all be important elements of that. Now, for instance, other elements of building the trust could be some commitments and action on mitigation measures which are taken by the industrialized countries, perhaps more aggressively than by. And certainly, a very good trust building factor would be not to put conditionalities on other countries that you're not willing to put on yourself. So we saw, for instance, when Europe had a crisis of gas and energy, it went and gave great subsidies. Now, all of Europe has representation on the fund board. Sorry, Pascal, I'm digressing a little bit. Has representation on the fund board, which put immense conditionalities on the developing world not to give any subsidies on energy, right? So what is true for the developing world must remain true for the developed world when push comes to shove. So really, it is going to be a step-by-step process because it is decades of mistrust. It will take at least years of trust building. And I do want to say, once again, the loss and damage fund, which was a major point of departure for the two, I think that's a really good step in the right direction. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Commissioner Khar. We have time for one last question from the gentleman in the back, and then I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up the session soon, but please, after you.
Hi, my name is Tariq Arafa. I want to ask a question regarding the lack of trust in nations. Are there any initiatives or recommendations to be implemented by the individuals in order to accelerate the target required instead of relying on the actions of nations?
Okay, Mr. Shimamoto, please.
I can speak from a kind of what AGU's kind of global community is doing in this effort, and this will be grounded a little bit more in the science perspective, but we have a program called Voices for Science that really empowers the scientists and those who are interested in science to become advocates for science-informed decision-making and going through the communication process and connecting them with decision makers and helping to learn and express ways that science can inform decision-making at the local level. So again, how to leverage a lot of the scientific findings that inform the governance report, taking that information, putting this in front of folks who are very interested in being vocal in this space, giving them the context and the connections, and allowing them to have these conversations in a way that perhaps would resonate with some different policy makers, whether it's at, speaking for the US, the state and local level, all the way to the federal, but when we think about the same capacity in other countries, ways to connect science-informed decision-making. So that's just one example, and I'm happy to discuss that more with you after.
Wonderful. Before we wrap up the session, I want to ask for any final messages or takeaways from each of our speakers, starting from Mr. Shimamoto all the way down through Commissioner Lamy and Commissioner Khar, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, I can just briefly say, these kinds of conversations are important. These reports are important to have a dialogue and showcase needs to not only have a snapshot in time of where the state of knowledge is, where the growth of governance is moving towards, where new tech is providing more opportunities, but also challenges for our community. And thinking about more broadly, how do we do this more routinely? I know that was one of the recommendations of the report. And then how can we think about building coalitions to support to inform the different priorities that come under the report? So thank you again for letting me be part of the panel.
Yeah, I just want to say, at the cost of repetition once again, that I think climate change and its impact is far too serious a matter and far too universal a matter for each one of us to remain in our silos and in our positions, which are either national or regional or divided between north and south, because it is a universal problem and it is not going to leave anyone. And I do want to say that the point that we are at today, which is almost a dangerous point, is because of universal inaction, because of global inaction in some ways. And I'm obviously oversimplifying it. There has been many, many actions. I mean, the fact that we're having COPs and trading, but it hasn't been enough. All this hasn't been enough. And much of it has to do with not keeping the commitments that we've already, negotiated and not been able to meet. So it is far too serious a problem for us to stand behind or to hide behind national positions or regional positions, and each one of us to only be driven by logic, reason, science, and the reality of the moment that we're in. And I think, obviously, it's completely not unsurmountable, but if we continue to be at the place that we are today and continue to be on the same trajectory, then we're on the train wreck, and I think we cannot deny it anymore.
I will have spent 1 week here working on different issues, the ocean, the poles, agriculture, and many other issues. One of the best moments of my week here was this morning when we met with a very large pro-climate NGO, very large. And when they told us, thanks for the report, you've provided us with a North Star of what has to be a much larger, much more vigorous global warming agenda. If we have done that, then I'm happy. Maybe we need to rediscuss that next year to see whether or not it is a North Star and whether it has guided a few people in the right direction. Thanks for your attention.
And with that, I would like to thank our speakers for such incredible wisdom on what is not merely a very easy topic, but still condensing so much in the short time that we had together. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for attending our event. If you are more interested in the work of the Climate Overshoot Commission, you can access the report yourselves online at overshootcommission.org. And with that, our session comes to a close. Thank you, everyone.